But there's been too little debate about legal immigration, too little debate about the consequences of what happened from, and you remember the days of Peter Mandelson boasting how they were going to open the doors. And indeed, for 20 years, I've been asking questions about the sheer number of people coming into this country, the impact that it's had on housing, on health, on roads. But I've been told for 20 years to shut up and go away, because it's good for the economy. It's good for the economy, and that is all that matters. Well, quite how you measure quality of life against the economy, I don't know. But now we're beginning to learn the truth, that simply what we've been told on this wasn't true. Far too many that have come don't work, have never worked, and never will work. The ability to bring dependents of all kinds. And when you realise that most that come are very low skilled and on very low wages, you start to get a very, very different picture. In fact, you start to get a massive benefits bill. So I want to be absolutely clear at the outset that we are here to make massive future cuts to welfare spending. I promised we'd announce this or something like this at our conference a few weeks ago. We are the party that will make massive cuts to welfare spending. And if we don't, well, what is coming down the track will best part bankrupt us, although some might say we're almost there, looking at the 30-year gilt yields this morning. Under a reform government, welfare will be for UK citizens only. It will not be for foreign-born nationals. Indeed, we'll become like most normal countries in the world. And in particular, what we're focusing on this morning is the Boris wave. The Boris wave after his huge victory in 2019, and I think the millions that came in the years of his premiership represents the greatest betrayal of democratic wishes, certainly in anyone's living memory. This is not what Brexit voters wanted, and it's certainly not what any Conservative voter wanted from 2010 onwards, where at election after election after election they were promised that net migration would come down to tens of thousands a year, and we learn it was up to, in the worst year, 1 million, although we haven't yet got the revisions. By the time they come in, it almost certainly will be over 1 million. The anticipated cost of the 800,000 plus who will qualify for indefinite leave to remain over the course of the next 3 to 4 years, the anticipated cost of this group of people is a staggering £230 billion. It is absolutely an eye-watering sum of money. We will not only say that these people do not qualify for indefinite leave to remain, we will abolish indefinite leave to remain as a category in this country. Zia will lay out in a minute the... Oh dear. That's not very good, is it? Well, things go wrong, hey. We'll laugh and carry on. Zia will outline the visa scheme in just a moment. But, you know, you come on a work visa. You can't bring a dependent with you. You can't claim benefits. And, of course, there'll be a route to citizenship, but a much tougher route to citizenship than we currently have. As I say, we will become like normal countries all over the world. And it's vital that we do this and vital that we get it right. This is grossly unfair on taxpayers. They are being absolutely hammered. And in terms of the national debt, which I touched on earlier, well, we've got major, major problems looming there already. We are not the world's food bank. It is not for us to provide welfare for people coming in from all over the world. The 800,000 people that will get indefinite leave to remain unless this policy is revoked tend to be young, tend to be low-skilled. They are going to be a huge burden on the state. And yes, of course, there's been debate in the newspapers this morning about those already here with indefinite leave to remain, and we just don't know. We don't know, because the figures aren't available, just how many of those are currently claiming benefits. What we do know is that 1 in 6 claimants of universal credit alone today, 1 in 6 is a foreign-born national. And we don't have the relevant figures for PIP and many of the other benefits that are available. Getting numbers out of this and the last government has proved a very difficult thing to do. So yes, we'll have work visas, and I've made it very, very clear. You come here to work and you're working. And what we're announcing today is, without doubt, a very bold set of proposals. It takes us away from where the debate in British politics has been for the last 25 years, but it does actually put the British people first. And that's why the document is entitled Prioritising UK Citizens. And that is the right, proper, decent and fair thing to do. I will hand over now to Zia Yusuf.
Good morning, everyone. So as Nigel has just outlined, Britain is facing a looming fiscal disaster. The Boris wave, in fact, actually the biggest betrayal the Tory government inflicted on this country has not yet exploded. That is the Boris wave. That is the millions of largely low-skilled, unskilled, non-EU migrants that were allowed to come to this country with more dependents than ever before, who will, in the coming years, be eligible to apply for indefinite, for ILR, indefinite leave to remain. So how do we solve this problem? And how do we finally, as Nigel says, put British people first, give British young people asymmetric access to our labour market, sort out the fact that for decades now actually in this country, business has had unlimited access to dirt cheap foreign labour at the expense of British workers, and probably most punishing of all for the long-suffering British taxpayer, the enormous amount of money that is spent on welfare at the behest of the British taxpayer for foreign nationals. So here's our solution. Firstly, we abolish ILR altogether. We will replace it with a 5-year renewable work visa, just like a lot of other countries do, America, the UAE, many comparators out there. The qualifying salary for this work visa will be materially higher than it is today. The specific number will be determined by our net fiscal modelling close to a general election, because that's the sensible and responsible thing to do, but it will be materially higher than it is today. Number 2, you cannot have criminal convictions. Number 3, as Nigel says, when he's Prime Minister, we will ensure we legislate so that foreign nationals are ineligible to claim welfare. That 1 in 6 number Nigel mentioned is a catastrophe. It's cost us £9 billion last year alone. And again, I want to emphasise that's before the impact of the Boris wave has actually been felt. So we have to make these changes. It's the only way we can prevent the UK, frankly, going bankrupt many times over as a result of these issues. We will also introduce an English standards test. So we will materially increase the required threshold of English needed to qualify for this 5-year renewable visa. And because it's renewable, it means we continue to adhere to those conditions in order to get it renewed after 5 years. That's exactly the sort of thing America does, for example, and it ensures the appropriate level of compliance. We will also increase the number of years you need to be in this country to qualify for British citizenship. The British passport is incredibly precious. We think it's the best passport in the world. It should be treated as such. So we will increase that threshold to 7 years. Now, we are obviously aware that there are certain job functions in this country that are reliant on foreign labour, without which there would be material detriment to British people. We call these national critical roles. So as a result of that, we will create something called an ASSV, an acute skills shortage visa. These will be strictly limited in number. There will be a finite cap at the start of the year. And really importantly, any employer that is sponsoring via this visa and benefits from it will have to pay a levy that in turn is spent on training the equivalent British worker for that role. This has insanely never really happened before. which is why it just goes on and on and on, and the acute turns into the chronic. So by implementing this policy, we will ensure that, for example, our care homes do have enough workers, but we'll go into the detail on that. That doesn't mean they can bring infinity dependence. But what it will mean is the national critical functions will be fulfilled in the near term, but, big but, British people will be trained up to do those jobs, so that to the degree we do issue those ASSVs, it will build long-term native British capacity. That's a really, really important part of the changes we're making. I also want to be clear, the existing routes for entrepreneurs, brilliant founders, for investors who want to come invest millions of pounds in this country, you are welcome. And in fact, in the coming months and years, we will announce more routes to do just that. You've already heard our Britannia card policy. Now, one of the interesting things about all of these policies we have announced here is that they can be summed up by the statement that a reform government under Nigel expects migrants to more than pay their way, not commit crime, and ultimately to speak English and contribute to this country. The fact that this is in any way controversial says more about the state of decay and malaise and betrayal that the political class has inflicted on this country. So I want to say one other thing, because Nigel mentioned it, but I just cannot emphasize this enough. You're probably going to have questions about, is it 234 billion? Is it 200 billion? Is it 400 billion? I want to make this point. The government chooses to hide data about the visa status and nationality of people using the NHS. So we don't know what that cost item is. It chooses to hide the same for state pension recipients. It chooses to hide the same for PIP disability recipients. And it chooses to hide the same for social care. These are enormous cost items. Ask yourselves why they hide those numbers. The true scale of this fiscal disaster that is looming on this country, if we do not get a reform government and if Nigel's not the Prime Minister, in reality is much, much higher than that £234 billion a year. And that's before we talk about the robbing of British people of their culture, the robbing of our young people of opportunity. You know, Boris Johnson was in the last week wrote an op-ed lambasting our younger generation for being wet, for being wimps. Now, look, there are many challenges that ail our young generation, and of course they're not perfect. But no older generation in this country had to compete with so much cheap, unskilled foreign labour coming into this country. So I personally thought Boris Johnson having the gall to write such a thing was a bit rich. But look, ultimately, what this comes down to is prioritising British people for British jobs, ensuring that our welfare system is for UK citizens and UK citizens only, and ensuring that that Boris wave of enormous numbers, millions, in fact 3.8 million, is what you would consider to be in the Boris wave. The 800,000 of that one might estimate would get ILR. I want to emphasise this point too, actually. This is a really important point to note. That makes assumptions about the take-up of ILR that are based on historic data. That historic data was when EU nationals were the majority of the incoming net legal migration cohorts. This is flipped in completely on its head. So even that would suggest that the assumption of 234 billion is way too low, because I put it to you, no matter what your political persuasion, try to be objective about answering this question. Do you think French people and Swedish people and Finns are more or less likely to apply for ILR and ultimately citizenship in this country than people from India, Afghanistan, or Pakistan? I think we all know the answer to that question. So I want to emphasize again, the magnitude of this looming fiscal disaster is huge. Reform will solve the problem. Thank you very much, and we'll take questions.